February 22nd, 1980, the U.S. Olympic hockey team, as everyone now remembers, beat the Soviet national team 4-3 in Lake Placid, New York, now known as the Miracle on Ice. Well, I got lucky. I was in a TV career at the time as a reporter for WAST-TV Albany, and they were nice enough to give me an all-expense-paid vacation for 2 weeks at the Olympic Games. Back in the late 1970s, WAST-TV, later known as WNYT, was the third-place news station in Albany, New York. But much like the U.S. Olympic hockey team, we were the little engine that could. Lots of talented people got hired, and the station started making some smart decisions. Of course, letting me get away with this classic 70s Ron Burgundy hair helmet might not have been one of those smart decisions. Well, partly because I was doing weekend sports, the station decided I was going to be the Monday through Thursday reporter during the 2 weeks of the Olympic Games. I'm going to brag a little bit here. The movies you're seeing are from my own 8mm home movie film collection, but they don't look like anybody else's movies, particularly your Uncle Harry's jerky, fuzzy, kind of nauseatingly seasicky old home movies. I shot with regular cameras, but I used a lot of extraordinary software to make them look like old movies that you've never quite seen before. I hope you agree. Most winter sports mountain resorts are extraordinarily beautiful places, and Lake Placid is no exception. They set up the traditional Olympic flame cauldron at the North Elba Horse Show grounds. You'll notice this isn't the giant stadium you're used to seeing, because this was the last of the small-town Olympic Games. 40 years later, there's a lot about Lake Placid that hasn't changed. This is one of the few main roads into town. Route 73, skirting along Upper Cascade Lake. If you went to the games or just visited Lake Placid, this is how you and I got there. Well, in advance of the 1980 games, WAST did a smart thing. We rented a house at 55 Parkside Drive. Here's the crew heading out for the day. An entire house all to ourselves, right in the middle of the action. That's City Hall behind us. I had my own bedroom. We had home-cooked meals. And oh yeah, history was about 2 blocks away. Those are the bleachers for the speed skating events. The ABC television network paid for the rights to broadcast the 1980 Winter Olympic Games in Lake Placid. But since we were a CBS station, we couldn't actually shoot any of the events. So we were more or less doing feature stories about stuff that went on around the outside of the Olympic Games and the people who were attending the games. This was our first day out shooting things. Bobsled practice was underway and we bundled up and headed up to Mount Van Hoevenberg. Photographing practice might have violated ABC's game exclusivity rights, but nobody seemed to care and nobody bothered us. One thing I worried about going into this was the Adirondacks' infamous cold weather. It could be -10 in the middle of the day and you just had to dress for it. As I recall, it was in the teens all day. Cold, but not life-threateningly cold. We hiked all the way up to the start gate. I think this might have been one of the USA teams practicing. I'm not an expert, but 2 big things in bobsled are getting a good push at the start and then steering straight and not banging into the walls on the way down. Video doesn't really do justice to the power and violence of this sport. 5 Gs and the walled turns aren't unusual. That's fighter pilot territory.
Miracle on Ice. Herb Brooks Arena.
Doesn't seem possible it could be that long ago, does it?
Yeah. I've been back to Lake Placid a bunch of times in the 40 years since those days, and the town hasn't really changed all that much. But the Miracle on Ice story keeps getting better and better. Oh, by the way, I tried out for the team, but apparently they weren't in the market for a 6'5" defenseman. I made that up. However, my men's league team played them, and we actually beat them. I made that up too.
After a day of shooting, we'd retreat to our cozy little house on Parkside Drive, and with a full setup of editing gear in the living room, we could either edit a story for the day or watch the travails of Mary Tyler Moore in her fictional newsroom. Somewhere around 3 o'clock, the CBS network guy would ring the doorbell, and we'd hand off the story I had done for the day, to be wired out to all the CBS network stations around the country, hungering for a taste of what it was like to be in Lake Placid. Warmth and bathrooms being in short supply here at the Olympics, we even had friends from Albany stop by to defrost.
So now on to the Miracle. Nobody really had any idea how the U.S. team would do in these Olympic Games. A week or so earlier, they'd been beaten by the Russians by a score of 10-3, a complete pasting. The first game was against Sweden, and because of all the bus problems, there weren't that many people in the stands, as you will see in a moment. And we were still feeling our way around as to what we could get away with, so we dragged our camera into the game. Now, these pictures I shot are from my own home movie camera.
The U.S. team never had any lead in this game against Sweden, and nobody really had any measure of how good the Americans were. They were down 2-1 in the waning moments of the third period, desperate to get a tying goal, because in this first round, just one loss was liable to knock you out of the medal round, a tie being obviously better than a loss. Since this game was being played early in the schedule here at Lake Placid, the transportation problems were evident in the nearly empty grandstands. I didn't have my camera rolling for when Bill Baker scored with just 27 seconds left, but I did roll for this, the signature joyous pileup of players. It felt like they won the game because, well, they didn't lose. That's the way the game ended, with a 2-2 tie. The team got some minor headlines for the last-minute heroics, but the miracle on ice stuff had yet to become evident. When we weren't watching hockey, we took our rare car permit and drove around the Olympic perimeter looking for good feature stories. I remember this particular day because the weather turned mild by Lake Placid standards, and we were getting some beauty shots at the Whiteface Mountain ski area. 40 years later, the flagpoles are still there, the mountain is still there, but the Olympic athletes and spectators have long since vanished.
Now back to more hockey. 2 nights after the U.S. team tied the Swedes 2-2, they took on the national team from Czechoslovakia. And this one was a bit of a surprise because the Czechs were supposed to be the second best team in the tournament after the Soviets.
Here are the last 10 seconds of that game, and this really got people talking. The U.S. won the game 7-3. Unexpectedly, they demolished a pretty good team. The buzz about the U.S. team had started, and the grandstands would start filling up. Time for the changing of the guard. My first Monday through Friday stint here in Lake Placid was done, and I had to head back to Albany to do my weekend sports anchor shift. There was quite a bit of giddy excitement because most of us knew this was a pretty big deal to draw this kind of assignment. And again, our own rather spacious house, just a few blocks from all the action. I heard horror stories from the other Albany stations about last-minute arrangements that left their people sleeping in basements a mile out of town.
After wrapping up my weekend sports anchoring job, I got to head back to Lake Placid on the following Monday for week number 2 at the Olympic Games. Now, I've often told people over the years that I got to see 5 of the 7 games that the Miracle on Ice team played. And now in retrospect, I'm beginning to think that was probably wrong. I think I only really saw 3 because I can only find 3 tickets at games I know I was at.
By the second week, Olympic organizers had finally squared away the bus shortage that left the game short on spectators. Unfortunately, this downtown Lake Placid beauty shot was ill-timed as one of the newfound buses did a great job blocking my shot. That's the 1932 Jack Shea Arena that was the focal point of the first Olympic Winter Games at Lake Placid. In a break from my TV work, I turned into a camera-toting tourist. People are standing on flag pedestals so they can see the outdoor speed skating rink. That was right next to the brand new arena where the Miracle on Ice game was played. It has since been renamed Herb Brooks Arena in honor of the U.S. hockey coach who died in a car crash. So the outdoor speed skating track. I think this was the last time any host city made the skaters compete outdoors, though you have to admire the purity of all this. If it's a winter game, everybody probably got their start doing whatever it was outside. We headed to the outskirts of town, and I got some shots of the 2 ski jumping slopes. There's a lot of physics that make this sport work, and designing the hill is critical. You need to design the landing slope just so to curve gently away as gravity pulls the skiers back down. No thanks, I'm not trying that. I'm pretty sure this was practice time because there weren't any crowds here.
By the second week, the U.S. Olympic hockey team was on a tear, winning game after game. And so we found it very difficult to get tickets to get into the place because it was becoming a very popular item. So if you're still hanging around waiting to see more of my inside footage of the hockey games, I'm afraid I'm all tapped out. Just thought I'd better say that in the interest of full disclosure. Now, on another subject, here's a question. What's the lake that you can see from downtown Lake Placid? Hint, this is a trick question.
The correct answer is Mirror Lake. Lake Placid does touch the village, but it's a little farther north. During the Winter Games, the medal ceremonies took place on frozen Mirror Lake, just down the block from our house. Every night, the winners would march out to much fanfare to accept their medals. One guy we saw a lot of was American speed skater Eric Heiden. He won every event he entered and collected an unprecedented 5 gold medals. Plus, he set 4 Olympic record times and a world record time. If he was a country, he would have placed 3rd in the gold medal count among all the nations at these games.
My 2 weeks at the Lake Placid Winter Olympic Games back in 1980 were all over. I had to go back to Albany to do my weekend sports shift, and with some degree of disappointment, I realized I was going to miss the big game against the Soviets, in which they defeated them in a very improbable score of 4-3, and then they went on to beat Finland 4-2 in a come-from-behind to win the gold medal. The one consolation prize I got was I got to go on television and report the good news.
Would I have preferred to have been at the games? Oh yeah, without a doubt. But in sum total, this was a big career highlight. There's videotape someplace in my archives of me doing that sportcast, the night of the Miracle on Ice. I get back to Lake Placid fairly often, maybe once a year. It has a very familiar look and feel to it. It does a thriving tourist business all year round, and it's a good skiing destination, with Whiteface being nearby. But all that aside, Lake Placid will always be a 2-time Olympics champion and the home to one of the greatest games ever played in hockey.